I'm Dave Heller, and this is NewsWorks Tonight. Ahead this evening, Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney's proposed sugary drink tax gains an influential ally. First, the religious order started by Catherine Drexel is selling off its properties and moving the saints' remains, as WHYY's Tom McDonald reports.
The Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament are putting their 44-acre property in Bensalem on the market. Order President Sister Donna Breslin says the buildings visible from I-95 are just too big and old, dating back to the late 1800s.
We're working with a consulting firm who has worked with other religious communities who have faced the same decision, during these years. They will be helping us to locate living facilities for our sisters, and what we are hoping is to remain in the greater Philadelphia area.
Bensalem Mayor Joseph DiGirolamo says he's shocked the religious order is moving out.
In another way, I know that they've had problems raising money, and I participated in many things over the years to keep it open.
The facility also houses the shrine to St. Catherine Drexel. Sister Breslin says the order made an agreement with the Archdiocese of Philadelphia to move it to the cathedral in Center City.
We were in conversation with Archbishop Chaput as we went forward in our planning, and Archbishop Chaput has confirmed that the remains of St. Catherine Drexel will be moved when the time is right, and her remains will go to the Cathedral of St. Peter and Paul. So that is for us a tremendous blessing.
The shrine is not expected to move out of Bensalem until at least the spring of 2017. I'm Tom McDonald, WHYY News.
An effort to pass a tax on soda and other sugary drinks in Philadelphia is getting a boost from the wealthy former mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg. Details from WHYY's Katie Culinary.
Bloomberg is credited with helping to pass a similar measure in Berkeley, California, after failing to ban large sodas in New York City while he was mayor. Now, Bloomberg is chipping in for an ad campaign promoting Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney's proposal for a 3 cents per ounce tax on sugary drinks to pay for early childhood education.
Philadelphia's chance to help lift our children with citywide pre-K is now.
A spokesman for the pro-tax group won't say how much Bloomberg is giving, but the total ad buy is worth $825,000. It's far less than the more than $2.5 million the soda industry has shelled out so far for ads against the tax, but there could be more cash coming. Bloomberg advisor Howard Wolfson says the former mayor is watching how the debate plays out here and that investing in Philadelphia's battle could have a bigger payoff.
I don't think there's any question that if Philadelphia passes the tax, it will have an impact on other places.
While Bloomberg's support for these measures is motivated by public health concerns and not necessarily funding pre-K, Mayor Kenney says his backing will help level the playing field.
We're up against 1%er billionaires who are willing to spend untold money to save their corporate profits. I welcome the help.
Anthony Campisi, a spokesman for the industry-backed coalition fighting the tax, criticized Kenney for turning to wealthy outsiders
who, are pursuing an ideology and trying to foist that ideology on Philadelphia families.
The group is planning to hold a rally outside City Hall tomorrow. Katie Culinary, WHYY News.
Ride-hailing company Uber recently settled a $100 million class action lawsuit in California and Massachusetts. But one thing didn't change. Drivers will remain independent contractors rather than Uber employees. In Philadelphia, there's a lawsuit hoping to change that status. But as WHYY's Bobby Allen reports, Uber says it shouldn't have the right to move forward.
Last time Uber drivers in Philadelphia downloaded the latest version of the company's app, most of them probably quickly pushed through the fine print. But in those tiny sentences was a very important section saying drivers are barred from participating in class action lawsuits. Uber's attorneys say this is why the Philly suit should be thrown out. But lawyer Jeremy Abbey, representing the drivers, says that's not right.
Because of those arbitration provisions, many cases get dismissed into arbitration without ever a judge deciding the merits of the case. And that's the strategy that Uber is employing here.
The class action suit in Philly is a little different than the ones around the country. This one is representing Uber Black drivers, the black car and SUV service, which actually operates legally in Philadelphia. It says Uber X, the cheaper Uber, has taken away business from the fancier service. And also that drivers have been mislabeled as independent contractors, depriving them of things like health benefits and Social Security that employees get. The suit represents 3 Philly drivers, but could include many more. Uber says they already gave up their right to their day in court when they updated their apps.
That's what Uber wants. They want to push the 3 plaintiffs into arbitration, have those claims resolved, and then they're banking on the fact that the remaining drivers won't actually pursue their claims, that it will be too expensive and too much of a headache for them.
UberX, the cheapest and most popular of its services, is illegal in Philadelphia, but a bill in Harrisburg under consideration will legalize it and levy a 1% tax on each ride. For WHYY News, I'm Bobby Allen.
One might assume that decades after laws banning lead in paint, gasoline, and pipes, it's essentially a thing of the past. It's not. And yet, most children in the state are never tested for lead. Keystone Crossroads reporter Marielle Segura has been following the issue and spoke about it with editor Naomi Starobin.
Marielle, how are people still exposed to lead, even though it was banned in so many things decades ago?
A lot of Pennsylvania's homes, about 70% of them, were built before the ban on lead paint in the late 1970s, and that paint is still around. I talked to Dr. Lauren Robinson, who's a deputy secretary at the State Department of Health, and she puts it this way.
We have a very rich and historical tradition, and we've got some great historical buildings. Unfortunately, a lot of those buildings include lead in some form or fashion.
When those buildings are renovated, that lead can end up in the air as dust, or if paint is chipping or peeling, it can also end up in children's mouths. Also, some homes are still connected to the city's water system by lead service pipes. And lead is allowed in exterior paint, and it's used in handmade pottery and toys from other countries.
And lead is especially harmful to children, right?
Right. Both adults and children can be poisoned by lead, but researchers say young children suffer additional health effects from lead, like drops in IQ, behavioral problems, and learning disabilities. When these kids eat the lead, they absorb more of it through their intestines than an adult would. And their blood-brain barriers, that's the barrier that keeps toxins in the blood from getting into the brain, those are still developing, so it's easier for lead to pass through. Also, young kids tend to put things in their mouths, including paint chips and their fingers, which may have touched lead, so they tend to have higher levels of lead in their blood.
So do we know how many children in Pennsylvania have lead in their blood and what the levels of lead are?
Sort of. In 2014, about 140,000 Pennsylvania children under age 7 were tested for lead, and more than 9% of them had what the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention considers an elevated blood lead level. That's way higher than the 4% of kids who have elevated blood lead in Flint. The problem is even worse in some Pennsylvania cities. In Allentown, 23% of kids who were tested had elevated blood lead levels. In Altoona, it's about 20%. In Scranton, it's about 19%. And the levels are higher than 10% in Easton, Chester, Philadelphia, and a bunch of other cities.
So you're saying that in Allentown, almost a quarter of the children have unacceptable levels of lead in their blood?
It's not that simple because most kids in the state aren't tested for lead at all. In 2014, only 14% of kids under age 7 were tested for lead. Oh. Only 26% of children between ages 1 and 2 were tested. Some states have passed laws requiring that all kids be tested at certain ages, but Pennsylvania doesn't have that law, so the testing is up to the discretion of doctors.
And is anyone calling for that to change?
Yes, the State Department of Health has shifted its policy to support testing all kids between ages 1 and 2. Here's Dr. Robinson again.
So we can get a better idea of where our lead poisoning really is at its worst and what are the communities that we need to intervene on in terms of lead abatement.
The governor's office supports this too. And state legislators recently introduced a bill that would require all kids under 6 to be tested for lead.
So if that happens, if that legislation gets passed, is it all good?
Not exactly. The scientists who research lead say testing children should just be a safety net. They say that because kids are more susceptible to damage from lead, and that damage might be permanent, waiting until they're exposed is like using them as the proverbial canary in a coal mine. So these researchers and the CDC say we need to do something to make sure kids don't live in homes where they could be exposed to lead. In Pennsylvania, the legislature is also considering bills that would fund lead abatement and increase testing for lead in water.
Thank you, Marielle.
Thank you.
That was Keystone Crossroads reporter Marielle Segura and editor Naomi Starobin. Keystone Crossroads is a statewide public media initiative reporting on the challenges facing Pennsylvania cities. WHYY leads the project. Still ahead, a journalist's quest to take back her family's estate despite having no hard evidence.
I said, I want to speak to the most senior person here, and the portly gentleman came to reception, and I said, I've come to claim my family's building. And he laughed at me.
NewsWorks Tonight continues on WHYY. Internationally observed Holocaust Remembrance Day begins at sunset tomorrow. That's when attendees at Mainline Reform Temple will hear a remarkable account from Dina Gold. She's co-chair of the Washington Jewish Film Festival and a senior editor at Moment magazine, the largest independent Jewish magazine in North America. The speaking engagement will focus on the riveting first-person account as told in her book entitled Stolen Legacy, Nazi Theft and the Quest for Justice at Krausenstrasse, 1718, Berlin, Germany. Dina Gold, thanks for joining us on NewsWorks tonight.
A pleasure, Dave.
Let's also note that you are a former London-based BBC investigative journalist, and it took that skill as well to embark on this long 6-year journey.
You're absolutely right. I think the training of being a BBC journalist was invaluable.
Tell us about your family and their roots in Berlin pre-World War II.
Well, my family had lived in Germany for as far back as we have records. My great-great-grandfather had founded a fur company in 1850, and his son, my great-grandfather, took it over and made it into an international success. And with that, he had bought himself what we call an estate, a villa with large grounds. And that's where his son, my grandfather, lived with his wife and my mother and her siblings.
Now, did this account come to you primarily orally through your mom, or are there written documents to that effect?
Oh, I found written documents in the process of conducting this claim, but I used to hear stories from my grandmother, not so much my mother, who really didn't want to look back in life. My mother left Germany at the age of 11, and she forged a future for herself. But my grandmother, Nellie, used to regale me with stories of their life before Hitler came to power.
Around what year was it when your mother, at age 11, left for then the British Mandate of Palestine?
Oh, my mother left with her parents and siblings in 1933, in the summer of 1933. She had been coming home from school telling her parents horrible stories of what the little girls were saying and doing to her. They would put their Stürmer in her desk, so she'd lift it up and find horrible anti-Semitic cartoons there. And my grandfather said, I am not bringing up my children in this atmosphere. We're out of here.
What is the process by which claims can be made to recover lost and stolen property?
It's highly complicated. I'm afraid for people claiming in Germany, the deadline has now passed. But in the rest of Eastern Europe, it's a mess. And many countries have not sorted this issue out, and people are still, 71 years after the end of the war, they are still trying to get their properties back.
Your task was made all the more difficult initially because you really didn't have much by way of documentation, photographs, even an address.
I had nothing. I had nothing except my grandmother's stories, which were frankly like fairy stories. But I thought that there may well have been an injustice, and I had to get to the bottom of it. And I started digging. And the Germans do hold on to documents. They are inveterate hoarders of documents. And if I went to the right archive, I could find the necessary paperwork.
Take us through what ultimately had to happen for you to be compensated for that property.
After the wall came down, I was working for the BBC, and I was working on the first combined German elections. And in 1990, I'd been in Bonn to cover the elections, and then I took a few days vacation, and I flew to Berlin, and I found the building, 2 blocks from Checkpoint Charlie. And I walked in. I said, I want to speak to the most senior person here, and the portly gentleman came to reception, and I said, I've come to claim my family's building. And he laughed at me, but he didn't laugh for too long. He took me into the canteen, and he said, I'm going to phone head office. And when he came back, he said, you're right. They've been waiting for this to happen, but they didn't know if anybody had survived. From that point, it was 6 years of hard work, finding documents to prove ownership, to prove what had happened during the Nazi era, how the family had come to lose the building. And also you have to get in Germany something called an Erbschein, which is a certificate of inheritance. And in order to get that, you have to provide birth, death, marriage certificates and wills. But after 6 years, they capitulated and said, yes, you've proven the case.
Of course, your grandmother, Nellie, died in 1977. To what extent did your mom and other family members benefit from your hard work on everyone's behalf?
They did quite considerably because the German government wanted to hold on to the building. Now, although they said, yes, you've proven the case, they said, we don't want to give the building back. We want to buy it off you. And in the mid-1990s, it was the Ministry of Transport. So they offered 20 million Deutschmarks, which in those days was the equivalent of $14 million. And my mother and her siblings said, yes, fine. So it was divided up, and it made their lives much more comfortable.
Dina Gold, thanks so much for joining us on NewsWorks tonight.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Dina Gold is author of Stolen Legacy. Attendees at Mainline Reform Temple's Holocaust Remembrance Day proceedings will be able to hear her account tomorrow night. You can hear much more of our conversation at newsworks.org. There are 48 zip codes in Philadelphia, and each one tells a story. We've been exploring them one by one with the project Every Zip Philadelphia. This evening, our tale takes us to Overbrook, zip code 19151. That's where Hugh McHugh has lived and worked since childhood. He started apprenticing at the local flower shop, Overhill Flowers, in 1972 when he was still in high school. He eventually took over the business, and he's been designing flower arrangements ever since.
Now, if I had to do a single arrangement to kind of describe what I feel the neighborhood of Overbrook is, I would take a vase and I would fill it up with at least 2 dozen. Plentiful. It's a vibrant area. And it would be roses because the community is really doing well. But the roses would be multicolored. And I would put all of those together because we really are a community here that has grown together in all of the ethnic backgrounds and all the diversity that we have, young and old. It's just been a great melting pot of everything that Philadelphia has, and it's just one of Philadelphia's great neighborhoods. So Al McGlaverty owned the business, and I lived in the neighborhood, and at the time the world seemed so small. When you grew up in a neighborhood like Overbrook, the house I grew up in is literally 300 yards away. The grade school I went to is directly across the street, about 100 yards away. And all of these stores along this strip here and the movie theater along the strip here, that was our world. Overbrook was where we played baseball, where we played football, where we played basketball, in the schoolyards, in the playgrounds. And when I graduated high school, there was an opportunity here for a job. And it was a great learning experience. Within a year or two, I was managing the shop when he was away. 10 or 15 years later, I don't remember the exact date, but my wife and I at the time, we bought the business. And since 1972, I've been here at Overhill Flowers. We hear a lot of interesting stories from the gentlemen or the ladies that are coming in trying to court somebody and what the flowers are going to mean for them. So, that's a pretty exciting time for a lot of people. And then you get the guy that's come in that, he put his foot in his mouth and he doesn't know how he's going to get out of it. He doesn't know if he's going to get in the door when he gets home. In those cases, we always tell them, take a loose bunch of flowers, wrap it in cellophane, don't get something in a vase, because if she throws it at you, we don't want you to get hurt by the vase. So we counsel people on many of those things. And then with the funerals, there's a lot of people that we do funerals for that we know that are longtime customers. We know the families. We know the family history. We know if the person's been sick. If someone's in the hospital, and we send flowers over the course of a year or two for their recovery, and then they pass away. And, we feel that loss as much as the family does when there's that personal connection. So, we are inside the people that we deal with on a very personal basis. There's a very strong sense of unity and family with our customers. And I want them to know that we're here. And I want my sons to take over and continue that for another 40 years.
Florist Hugh McHugh from Philadelphia's Overbrook neighborhood. Every Zip Philadelphia is produced by WHYY and Finding America, a national initiative of AIR, the Association of Independents in Radio, with financial support from the Wincote Foundation and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. That's all for tonight's show. NewsWorks Tonight is produced by Shai Ben Yaakov and Kimberly Haas, with additional production today from Brett Rader. Find us on iTunes or listen back at newsworks.org. Marketplace is next, and then stay with WHYY for special coverage, NPR's presidential primary, starting at 7. Today, Indiana is the lone prize for both Democrats and Republicans, and it could play a pivotal role for both parties. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dave Heller for NewsWorks Tonight.